Gentlemen, study this map carefully. We must determine the best position for our guns in the event of an attack on Russia, Roque said. We stared at him, speechless. We had a friendship treaty with Russia, and we were at war with England. Things were not adding up. Why would we attack Russia? I asked. It is just an exercise, Roque said, a hypothetical situation. We studied the map and with Rocky determined the best positions for the guns of each battery. We then went out and found the positions assigned to us. It could have been just another exercise, but none of us really believed that. Rocky looked very serious and tense and said, "You are each to send a work detail of men in civilian clothing to load 300 rounds of ammunition for your guns into farm wagons and take the rounds to your assigned gun positions. Your men are to look like farmers doing farm work, and your ammunition is to be camouflaged after you unload it." We did not look at each other. It was evident that we were going to invade Russia even though we had a friendship treaty with her. "When are we going to invade, Major?" Schumann asked. "It is only an exercise, Schumann, a purely hypothetical situation, but we have to make it look as real as possible. We had been in Prostken about 3 weeks by now, and the horse handlers knew the farm families where their horses were being kept. Getting civilian clothing was no problem for them. This assignment was something of a holiday for them because it was different from normal army routine. The rather comical-looking crew loaded the ammunition into the farmers' wagons, and then, pretending they were farmers doing farm work, they hauled the ammunition to the designated positions, unloaded it, and covered it with brush. The next day, June 21st, 1941, battery commanders were finally officially informed of what was about to happen. "Before daylight, we would invade the Soviet Union," Raka said simply. "I was forbidden to tell you until now." "Why are we invading Russia?" Wittenauer asked. Raka shrugged his shoulders. "We are soldiers," he said. "We do as we are told." It seemed inexplicable to me that we were getting ready to invade the Soviet Union. We had a friendship treaty with the Soviet Union, and there had been no government propaganda against Russia. However, the propaganda started almost immediately, even in the official army order we received. The communist regime in Russia is imposing cruelties upon the Baltic and other ethnic minorities, as well as the Russian people. Therefore, we must destroy this cruel government and the communist commissars. The justification was simply that they were communists and we had to fight them. The German government at that time used the word communist to excuse anything it wanted to do to Russia, just as the Soviet Union and the Western powers later used the words Nazi and fascist to justify anything they wanted to do to Germany. I did not know a lot about the Soviet Union at the time. I knew it was a backward country. I knew the communist government had persecuted landowners. I knew about the fighting between the Red and White armies during the Russian Revolution. I knew about the forced collectivization and the mass starvation of large segments of its population, and I knew about the purge of the officer corps in the Soviet army. I did not think the Red Army could be very effective, not only because of the purge of its officer corps, but because they had a political officer in every unit who could overrule the orders of any military commander, and I could not see how that could possibly be made to work. I also knew that trains were moving back and forth daily between Germany and the Soviet Union, carrying goods that were being exchanged between the two countries in agreement with the trade terms of the Friendship Treaty. The whole thing seemed almost dreamlike in its lack of recognition of existing reality. Although I was deeply troubled about invading a country with which we had a friendship treaty, I assumed there were things that I did not know. I also found the very thought of communism repulsive and honestly felt that the Russian people would be better off if we removed their communist government. Perhaps I was rationalizing, or perhaps it was just the innocence of youth. I do not think it even occurred to me or anyone else that we would fail to defeat the Soviet army. Our confidence was absolute. Our guns were still in the village several kilometers away. When darkness descended, we moved the guns from the village to their designated positions. The noise of bringing all our guns into position and bringing the infantry into position had to be clearly audible to the Russian sentries in their watchtowers. Their towers were no more than 4 kilometers from our gun positions, and the infantry moved even closer, to within 300 meters of them. Of course, they might have been sleeping. It is a very boring job to sit in a sentry tower day after day. There was no major road, railroad, or anything else of special importance nearby, and they had been watching for 2 years with nothing happening. We then laid telephone wire between the guns and our forward observation post and went into full combat readiness. I spent the night checking out my battery, making sure that everything was in order and everyone was in the right place. I realized only now that the same thing must be happening for hundreds of kilometers along our border with Russia. The woods along the frontier were surely swarming with German troops who were resting, sleeping, waiting to go into battle. A bright moon shone over the forests of East Prussia, spreading its light through the trees. It was the same moon that had watched countless other battles through the ages. The same moon had shone when the Persians marched into Greece, when Napoleon marched into Russia, when the Kaiser's army fought in France. A few kilometers away, the village that would be our first objective lay sleeping, bathed in the comfort of soft moonlight. The scene looked like a beautiful painting, but I knew the reality would soon be very different. War was about to fill the new day with noise, fire, smoke, rubble, lead, corpses, and the blood-stained bandages of the wounded. Those who lay sleeping now would not soon go to sleep again with the sense of peace they now knew. I wandered among the 180 men of my battery, checking things out. I became more aware of the men as individuals than I had ever been before. The diverse thoughts that lay behind their helmets as they waited for battle only they could know. Love of country and sorrow at the prospect of dying in battle were surely common to all of them. One soldier was humming softly to himself in meditation, some were no doubt full of foreboding, and others were thinking of home and loved ones. The men were strong and sure of themselves. They had practiced constantly, and they knew they could do their job well. Their confidence was total, like that of a diamond cutter taking a chisel to a priceless gem. Now they sat about in groups, joking bravely about everything except what lay immediately ahead of them. I was confident the world had never seen anything like them. Their native intelligence, their conditioned bravery, and their practiced skills would flow into one channel and coalesce, and when that happened, they would be unstoppable. At the designated time in the very early hours of June 22nd, 1941, my battery opened fire on the small village of Sasnia, a few kilometers from our guns. I was not in the front line with the infantry, but at a little hill about a half-kilometer away, which I thought would be a good place from which to watch the effectiveness of our fire. I could see our shell bursts clearly from my observation post, as well as the oily black and yellow smoke that rose from them. The unpleasant, peppery smell of burned gunpowder soon filled the air as our guns continued to fire round after round. After 15 minutes, we lifted our fire, and the soft pop-pop-pop of flares being fired replaced it as red lit up the sky, and the infantry went on the attack. As the infantry moved forward, the morning darkness was filled with the sounds of shouting, the crack of rifle shots, the short bursts of machine guns, and the shattering crashes of hand grenades. The rifle fire sounded like the clatter of metal-wheeled carts moving fast over cobblestone stone streets. Our infantry overran the barbed wire the Russians had erected on each side and stormed the guard towers and pillboxes the Russians had built immediately beyond the death strip. Although we met with some resistance, the Russians had been taken by surprise, in spite of the noise of our preparations. Our infantry had short but bitter firefights with the surprised Russian troops. Our men took as prisoners those Russians who surrendered and killed those who resisted. Some of the Russian soldiers in Sasnia tried to pull back and got caught in a bottleneck at a bridge, where Stuka dive bombers decimated them. They lay where they had fallen in earth-brown uniforms, the first combat dead I had seen since the invasion of France. Although I was no longer shocked by the sight, I had not become accustomed to it either. We took Sasnia and Grajewo the first day, and then we started the long march to Moscow.